Welcome to episode 3 of Hobby Herps, the private keepers and the vets. Now, the one thing I really want to make clear is that this episode isn't meant to be divisive. It's not meant to create or widen any gaps in the community. If anything, I'm trying to kind of bridge some of those gaps and mend some fences because just in my years, I have noticed the stark difference in how veterinary and academic people tend to keep their animals and the philosophy behind their keepings versus just regular everyday folks that have reptiles. And so, this is meant to sort of bridge those gaps and bring us closer together as a community, ideally. Because the reality is that veterinary keepers and private reptile keepers often operate under completely different constraints. And that affects how they think about their animals, how they treat them, how they manage them, just everything about their keeping. And I'd like to go over those differences and bridge any gaps, if you will. Generally, vets tend to work from the model of like risk reduction and liability. They're really trained to assume worst case scenarios, documentation. They're all about documentation, and they operate from a sort of worst case scenario perspective. They'll see the animal generally after something's already happened, which that by itself is also enough to kind of skew their view of reptile keepers in general from the other side. Because private keepers, especially the long-term breeders, will often operate from more pattern recognition and lived experience. They've seen dozens to hundreds of similar or identical cases between their animals, and that can lead to quicker, cheaper, and sometimes even more effective solutions that an exotics vet might not think about or even know about. But that can also kind of lead to blind spots, and I feel like a lot of people don't really want to admit that. The uncomfortable part is that both sides can be right and both sides can be wrong, right? So anybody can make a mistake. A breeder that's been doing it for 20 years, he can definitely make a mistake. A vet that's been top of their game for 20 years, they can also make mistakes, right? Like, we're all just only human, and so it's really just about transparency. No matter which side of the spectrum you fall on, just be transparent about everything, about why you're doing things, what you're doing. That's what I'm all about, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about titles. It's not about, how you feel about yourself. It's whether the decisions are being made are being done with the welfare of the animal in mind. On both sides of that spectrum, I can think of instances where maybe somebody may have made a decision not in the best interest of the animal. Like in the case of, say, a breeder that might be breeding a type of creature that might have some neurological issues with the morph, or, maybe kinked spines, thing like that, and they keep breeding them, because that's what brings in their money. They can claim it's, not bad for their well-being and whatnot, but at the end of the day, I don't know, it's an ethical question. Same thing with some vets. I've seen some exotic vets that if you have a snake that's sick, they might pressure you to bring it back every week until it no longer shows symptoms, and that is just inherently not good for the animal. That's not how reptile immune systems tend to work. And so in some cases, especially if you just have a simple RI, the best thing to do is to address the husbandry issue, bring the snake into the vet once, get tested, diagnosed, all that stuff, get it looked at, and then just fix whatever's going on in your enclosure, right? Because that is 90% of what's going to make sure your snake's immune system is strong enough to take care of that, versus, bring it to the vet every week is slowly going to be weakening its immune system. So even if you do address all of that, it's still not going to make a difference, or it could just prolong how long it takes your snake to get better. And, speaking of things that may or may not be for the benefit of the animal, I have in my city an exotics vet who in some Florida blue garter snakes that I guess they want to keep together, which is fine. But the thing is, I guess they're going to spay the female. I feel like putting the animal under surgery to possibly prevent it from doing something natural that it was perfectly healthy and capable of doing, I feel like that's unnecessary. I really do. And part of me is kind of wondering if it's just because they're a blue morph and they just kind of want to take away that possibility of somebody else breeding it in the future in case they no longer can keep it, kind of thing. So it's, I mean, you can't force a snake to breed. Like, you can't. Like, if they don't want to breed, they're not going to breed. So it's the kind of thing where you don't have to do that. And if the snake dies while it's under anesthesia, well, you've just killed that snake by enforcing your own ideals on it. And so it's one of those things, so there's room for errors on both sides. But that's why I wanted to make a show like this, and especially an episode like this, so that both sides can maybe try and take something from it and up their game and maybe come closer as a community. Because I personally believe that the cross-pollination of ideas and perspectives is probably one of the best things for a community like the reptile community, especially when you have, the fact that veterinary or exotics veterinary medicine is incredibly underfunded and under-researched to the point where a lot of reptile keepers kind of have to become their own vets to an extent. And with that, it's just a positive thing, being able to share knowledge and experience between the different sides of the spectrum. Now, moving on to reptile news. The state of Florida is seeing fallen iguanas again. The state of Florida has euthanized over 5,000 iguanas after the cold snap, and they got stunned and fell out of the trees and were easy pickings. It's one of those things you kind of forget that iguanas are invasive because they're just so synonymous with Florida. But, yep, state officials took advantage of the cold snap, and they went and got them. I was going to say it would be easy to go snag one, but honestly, you couldn't pay me to have an iguana. So coming back, keeping with the theme of the trying to bridge gaps and cross-pollinate with ideas, that's one thing I have to say is becoming more of a benefit to how close everyone is just via the internet and social media, being able to share new discoveries and just new tricks, what they find. There's basically a whole revolution in the reptile community, and things like enclosure sizes. Everything's being completely changed up as far as what is now considered adequate for your species. A lot of that came from the veterinary side of things, I believe, and as well as private keepers, kind of pooling their knowledge together and noticing different things, realizing different things, and as well as being able to run those diagnostic tests and find out that, like, hey, these animals that we thought were doing well for decades are actually not. And we can see that from their blood. Things like stress hormones, if they're deficient in anything, lighting is the new biggest thing that's kind of being changed up now. People are discovering that what we have for lighting in the reptile industry is not at all what we thought is adequate. And that's becoming very in-depth and specific, to a point where now you can even get devices that you can just stick in your enclosure and it tells you the UV rating, which I think that's phenomenal. Nutrition. People are discovering more and more that what we're feeding our reptiles in captivity might not be what they should be eating, what they need. Especially when you come across different species that might, some species might eat tadpoles in the wild. Some might really just eat snakes or lizards, and then you stick them in captivity and you give them a small to large rat, a couple times a month or something like that. And the kind of thing where that's inherently going to change their biology and their behavior. And that is all new discoveries coming to light. And that is once again something that I believe really came about due to the combination of knowledge and experience from private keepers and the academics and veterinary side. And so that just goes to show that when you come together, it can really change things for the better. Because I do see the reptile community having a very bright future with all of the discoveries that are coming out. And as long as everybody is willing to stay transparent and open about what they need to do and what might need to be changed, then the community as a whole will continue to grow and flourish. But that is it for this episode. Thanks for joining me. Come back next time for episode 4, where we're going to be taking a deep dive into lighting. Yeah, we're going to be looking into reptile lighting specifically, so it's going to be fun.